I'm Clara Bennett, 35 years old, and last night something happened that I've been waiting for over a decade to witness. While my older sister mocked my limited budget, I just smiled and continued enjoying my main course. My whole life I've been the forgotten daughter, the one who didn't deserve attention or recognition. But now, after years of hard work, I finally had my moment. I didn't scream, I didn't throw shade, I didn't even bother correcting her assumptions. I just waited. And when the waiter approached at the end of the night, everything changed in an instant. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely invisible in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. The thing about being overlooked your entire life is that you develop a superpower. You become invisible by choice. You learn to observe, to wait, to let people show you exactly who they are without any interference from you. And last night, my dear sister Helena gave the performance of a lifetime. But let me back up a bit because this story starts way before that restaurant. It starts in a small town where I learned that being the younger sister meant being the supporting character in someone else's story. Helena was always the star, the perfect daughter who got the best grades, the best clothes, the best everything. I was just there, like furniture that occasionally needed feeding. My parents, bless their hearts, never tried to hide their favoritism. Dad would beam with pride talking about Helena's achievements while I sat there like a potted plant that had learned to nod at appropriate intervals. Mom would spend hours helping Helena with her homework while telling me to figure it out yourself because I was so independent. Translation: we're too busy investing in our real daughter to worry about you. Independent. That was their code word for ignored. But you know what? Sometimes the best revenge isn't a dish served cold. Sometimes it's served at exactly the right temperature with a perfect wine pairing and a side of poetic justice. Sometimes it's watching someone realize they've been sitting in your kingdom while telling you that you don't belong anywhere near royalty. See, while Helena was living her golden child fantasy, getting everything handed to her on a silver platter, I was quietly building something she never saw coming. I was learning that the people who underestimate you give you the greatest gift of all, the element of surprise. Every dismissive comment, every time they forgot to include me, every moment they made me feel small, I was taking notes. Mental notes that would serve me well later. The irony is beautiful when you think about it. They spent so much time telling me I wasn't good enough that they never bothered to actually look at what I was becoming. While they were busy celebrating Helena's predictable path through corporate America, I was creating something they couldn't even comprehend. Something that would eventually make their jaws drop and their assumptions crumble. And last night, after 35 years of being treated like the family disappointment, I finally got to use that gift. The look on Helena's face when she realized who I really was, priceless. Absolutely priceless. It was like watching someone realize they'd been insulting royalty while sitting in the royal palace. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. You need to understand how we got here, because this isn't just a story about a restaurant. This is a story about what happens when the underdog stops trying to prove herself to people how we're never going to see her anyway, and just starts being herself. This is about what happens when you stop begging for crumbs and start baking your own bread. This is about the sweet, sweet taste of success that comes not from revenge, but from becoming everything they said you'd never be. So buckle up, because this journey has more twists than a pretzel factory, and every single moment was worth the wait. Growing up in the shadow of my older sister Helena was like living in permanent eclipse. She was the perfect firstborn, the golden child who always got the best of everything our family had to offer. While Helena received expensive gifts, elaborate parties, and financial support for all her dreams, I lived off the scraps, hand-me-down clothes, rushed birthday wishes, and complete silence about my own aspirations. The difference in treatment was so obvious that even family friends would comment, "Don't you think Clara deserves a turn?" I remember Mrs. Henderson from next door asking once when my parents bought Helena a car for her 16th birthday. My mother just laughed it off. Clara understands she needs to wait her turn, but my turn never came. It was like being in a queue for a ride that had been permanently closed, but nobody bothered to tell you. My father, a respected bank manager in our small town, never hid his pride in Helena's career in the financial world. "She's following in my footsteps," he'd say constantly at family dinners, his chest puffing up like a peacock showing off its feathers. When I expressed interest in culinary arts at 16, I heard from him, "Cooking is a hobby, not a career." My mother, a high school teacher, shared the same vision. Because apparently in their world, creativity was just a cute phase you grew out of, like believing in Santa Claus or thinking you could be anything you wanted. What hurt most wasn't the rejection itself, but the casual way it was delivered, like they were discussing the weather. "We need to invest in Helena's future first," they'd explain with the patience of saints talking to a particularly slow child. She's already in college, she needs our support to get established. When it's your turn, we'll see what we can do. The phrase, "we'll see," became the soundtrack of my childhood. We'll see about your birthday party. We'll see about that school trip. We'll see about your dreams. The logic was simple in their minds. Why waste resources on an uncertain career like gastronomy when they could guarantee at least one daughter would succeed in the corporate world they understood and valued? Makes perfect sense, right? Well, if you're living in the 1950s and think creativity is something only unstable people pursue. Clara has always been independent. She manages well on her own, was what they'd say when someone questioned the obvious difference in treatment. And that became the story they told so often that even I started believing it. Because if you hear something enough times, it becomes your truth, whether you like it or not. I became the easy child, the one who didn't need attention, the one who could handle disappointment with grace. I remember one Christmas when Helena got a professional camera set she'd been wanting, while I received a basic cookbook from the clearance section. The price tags were still on both gifts. Helena's gift was worth more than I'd see in allowance for an entire year. But when I looked disappointed, my father actually had the audacity to say, "At least you got something practical that matches your interests," as if the fact that it was food-related made up for the fact that it was clearly an afterthought. When I finally graduated high school, there was no car, no celebration, because my parents were too busy paying for Helena's college graduation party. And when I managed to get into culinary school, once again I heard there was no way to help me. After all, Helena was about to get married, and the family finances already had their destination mapped out. I spent my 18th birthday eating cake alone in my room while my parents discussed Helena's wedding plans downstairs. The cake was store-bought, generic. The candles were left over from her last birthday party. That night, I made myself a promise while staring at my reflection in my bedroom mirror. I wouldn't spend my life begging for crumbs from their table. I'd build my own damn restaurant. I kept trying to earn their approval like some kind of emotional masochist who couldn't take a hint. I visited my parents every holiday, helped with family gatherings, and always brought small, handmade gifts that ended up forgotten in some drawer. I called every week to check how everyone was doing, even though I rarely received the same treatment in return. It was like being in a one-sided relationship with an entire family. During Helena's wedding planning, I threw myself into helping with an enthusiasm that now makes me cringe. I spent weeks helping with preparations, staying up late assembling the floral arrangements she'd chosen, even though I was working 2 jobs to pay my bills. During the reception, I stayed in the kitchen making sure everything was perfect for my sister's big day. Because heaven knows, someone had to make sure Princess Helena's special day went off without a hitch. The wedding itself was a masterclass in family dynamics. I watched my parents beam with pride as Helena walked down the aisle in a dress that cost more than my entire wardrobe. I helped coordinate with caterers, arrange last-minute details, and made sure every guest felt welcome. But when it came time for family photos, I was relegated to the back row, partially hidden behind a cousin I barely knew. "Clara, could you serve some more champagne glasses?" my mother asked while I watched everyone having fun at the party I helped organize. I swear, I could have been wearing an unpaid intern t-shirt and nobody would have noticed the irony. Even at my sister's wedding, I was still just the help. During the toast, my father spoke for 20 minutes about the couple's bright future, mentioning how proud he was of the daughter who had always been his pride. He talked about Helena's accomplishments, her bright future, her wonderful husband. He spoke about family traditions and legacy. I just smiled and raised my glass, invisible as always. Seriously, I could have been a ghost and gotten more recognition. "Don't worry about Clara," my mother told the wedding organizer when asked where I should sit for the formal dinner. "She can sit anywhere, she understands." And I did understand. I understood that I was trying to earn a seat at a table that would never be mine. I understood that no matter how much I helped, how much I gave, how much I tried to be the perfect daughter, I would always be the supporting character in their story. The saddest part? I kept a photo from that wedding on my dresser for years. Not because it was a happy memory, but because it was the only family photo where I was actually in the frame, even if I was blurred in the background. Talk about symbolism, right? Even in pictures, I was an afterthought. After the wedding, I'd lie awake wondering what I had to do to matter. Get a PhD, cure cancer, invent time travel, win the lottery, and buy them a house. Because apparently being a decent human being who showed up for every family event and helped with everything wasn't cutting it. That's when I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't the problem. I was never the problem. The problem was that I was trying to get water from a stone, love from people who had already decided I wasn't worth their investment. I was begging for recognition from people who had chosen their favorite long before I even understood the game was rigged. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Drop a comment below if you've ever been the afterthought in someone else's story. Trust me, you're not alone in this. Eventually, I learned to stop expecting anything from them, but it was a lesson that came with its own kind of heartbreak. During those years between high school and leaving home, I took every culinary course I could afford at the local community college, working part-time jobs to pay for them while my parents focused entirely on Helena's career trajectory. I worked at a local diner during weekends, learning basic kitchen skills while Helena enjoyed her college experience on my parents' dime. Those community college cooking classes became my sanctuary. In that small, outdated kitchen with its temperamental ovens and mismatched equipment, I found something I'd never experienced at home: recognition for my actual abilities. Chef Rodriguez, the instructor, was a gruff man in his 60s who'd worked in restaurant kitchens his entire life. He didn't care about family dynamics or favoritism. He cared about whether you could properly dice an onion without crying, and if you understood that cooking was equal parts technique and heart. "You have good instincts, Clara," he told me after I'd successfully prepared a complex sauce that had stumped half the class. "Don't let anyone tell you this isn't a real career. I've seen lawyers who can't even boil water properly." It was the first time an adult had validated my choice, and I held on to those words like a lifeline. And it was with that foundation, a suitcase, some carefully saved money, and a whole lot of courage that I left my hometown and headed to New York, searching for a fresh start. I was 25 years old and determined to prove my worth. To myself, not to them anymore. The goodbye was as quiet as my existence in that house had been. I told my parents during a Sunday dinner that I was moving. My father nodded distractedly while watching the game on TV. My mother asked if I was sure, but before I could answer, Helena called to talk about her new job, and the conversation about my departure was forgotten, because of course it was. I could have announced I was joining the circus and gotten the same level of attention. The night before I left, I sat in my childhood bedroom surrounded by boxes, feeling a mixture of excitement and terror. I was about to move to one of the most expensive cities in the world with barely enough money to survive the first month, but for the first time in my life, I was choosing my own path. Nobody was telling me it was impractical or unrealistic. Nobody was comparing me to Helena or suggesting I should find something more stable. The day I left a note on the refrigerator. "Going to New York to try for a spot in culinary school. I'll call when I get there." Nobody called to check if I'd arrived safely. Not the first day, not the first week, not ever. The silence spoke volumes about how little my presence had meant to them. There, sharing a tiny apartment in Queens with 3 strangers who became more family to me than my actual family ever was, I started as a dishwasher in a bustling Lower East Side restaurant. The apartment was barely bigger than my childhood bedroom, and I shared it with Maria, a dancer from Puerto Rico, Jennifer, an aspiring actress from Ohio, and Sam, an art student from Vermont. We were all chasing dreams that our families didn't understand, and we formed a bond that sustained me through those early difficult months. The nights were long and my hands would turn red and painful from the constant exposure to hot water and harsh detergents. But for the first time, I felt like I was building something that was mine. Every dish I washed was a step closer to my goal. Every shift I completed was proof that I could survive on my own. The kitchen was brutal, hot, loud, and unforgiving, but it was honest in a way my family never was. In the kitchen, your skills spoke for themselves. Nobody cared about your last name or whether daddy had connections. You either could cook or you couldn't. You either had the stamina for the job or you didn't. It was pure meritocracy, and I thrived in that environment. In silence and without support, I worked my way through every station in the kitchen, from dishwasher to prep cook to line cook, until I was hired by a hotel as part of the main team. Each promotion felt like a small victory against everyone who had ever doubted me. My talent grew alongside my confidence, and my dishes started getting attention from customers and critics alike. The journey wasn't easy. There were nights when I'd come home to my shared apartment with burns on my arms and cuts on my fingers, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. The kitchen culture was tough, especially for women. I had to prove myself twice as hard as my male colleagues, and I had to do it while earning barely enough to cover rent and ramen noodles. I remember one particularly brutal week when I was working as a line cook at a busy midtown restaurant. The head chef was a temperamental man who believed in teaching through humiliation. He'd thrown a plate at my head because I'd slightly overcooked a piece of fish, screaming that I was worthless and would never make it in this industry. I locked myself in the supply closet afterward and cried for 10 minutes, questioning everything I'd sacrificed to get there. But then I thought about my conversation with Chef Rodriguez, about the way he'd believed in my instincts. I thought about my family back home, probably not even wondering how I was doing. I dried my tears, walked back into that kitchen, and prepared the best fish dish of my career. The same chef who had humiliated me an hour earlier grudgingly admitted it was acceptable. In that world, acceptable from him was equivalent to a standing ovation. At 27, I was promoted to kitchen assistant after filling in for a sick colleague and impressing the chef with my knife technique. At 29, I was already a line cook, responsible for the cold station. Each step was small but firm, built on hard work and determination, not family connections or inherited opportunities. When I became the hotel restaurant's chef, my life finally tasted like victory. It was at that hotel that I met Chef Marcus, an industry veteran who recognized something in me that I didn't even see clearly myself. He wasn't just my boss. He was a mentor who taught me as much about cooking as he did about confidence and leadership. Marcus was everything I'd hoped to find in the culinary world: talented, demanding, but fair. He had trained in Paris under some of the most demanding chefs in the world, and he brought that discipline to our kitchen. But unlike the tyrant I'd worked under before, Marcus believed in building people up rather than tearing them down. "You have something that can't be taught, Clara," he told me one night after service while tasting a new dessert I'd created. "You tell stories through food. That's rare." Coming from a man who'd worked alongside James Beard winners and Michelin-starred chefs, those words meant everything to me. Marcus encouraged me to experiment, to take risks, to find my own culinary voice. He didn't do the work for me, never offered shortcuts or special favors, but he gave me something far more valuable: genuine recognition of my talent and the space to develop it. Under his guidance, I started developing the signature style that would later define my own restaurant. "Your sauce is perfect. I've never tasted anything like it," commented an influential food critic who visited the restaurant. That positive review was published in Food and Wine magazine, and suddenly people wanted to meet Chef Clara. For the first time in my life, strangers were more interested in my story than my own family had ever been. But at home, I was still just the younger daughter who works at a restaurant. The disconnect was almost comical. I was getting written up in major publications, while my mother still asked when I was going to get a real job. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so painful. During a quick visit to my hometown, I brought some pastries I'd created especially for the occasion. My father tasted them absent-mindedly and said, "Very good. You always had a knack for cooking. Too bad you didn't follow a real career like your sister." I literally bit my tongue to keep from laughing. A real career. Right. Because apparently feeding people's souls wasn't as real as shuffling their money around. That night, I cried silently in my old room that now served as storage for things nobody wanted. But the next morning, I returned to New York with renewed determination. If my family couldn't see my value, the world would. My social media presence was simple: photos of beautifully plated dishes and my rescued pets. No selfies, no success declarations. I never bragged about my progress. Maybe because part of me was still seeking approval in all the wrong ways. Or maybe because I'd learned that truly confident people don't need to announce their confidence every 5 minutes. The thing about growing up invisible is that you learn to let your work speak for itself. While Helena was constantly posting about her promotions and achievements, I was quietly documenting my culinary journey. My Instagram followers were fellow chefs, food lovers, and industry professionals who appreciated artistry over self-promotion. It was a small but engaged community that actually understood what they were looking at. I had rescued 2 cats from the streets of New York, Shadow and Whiskers, who became my roommates when I finally moved into my own studio apartment after getting financially established. They were my family now, greeting me after long shifts with purrs instead of criticism. Shadow, a black cat with one white paw, had been found injured in an alley behind the restaurant. Whiskers, an orange tabby, had been abandoned outside my building. Taking care of them taught me about unconditional love, something I'd never experienced in my childhood home. At this time, I received a proposal that would change my life: becoming head chef at one of Manhattan's most prestigious restaurants. The salary was significantly higher than what I was making, and my name would be on the door. Finally, validation from people who actually understood what that meant. The interview process was intense. I had to prepare a 5-course tasting menu for the restaurant's owner and executive team. I spent weeks planning, testing recipes, sourcing the perfect ingredients. The night before the interview, I barely slept, running through each dish in my mind, second-guessing every decision. But when I walked into that kitchen and started cooking, everything felt right. This was what I was meant to do. "We want you to bring your unique vision to our menu," the owner said after tasting my food. "Your food tells stories nobody else can tell." Funny how strangers could see what my own family couldn't, right? These people who had no obligation to care about me recognized something valuable that my own blood relatives had dismissed for years. On the same day I got the job offer, I received a message from my mother. Helena was promoted to vice president of the bank. "We're organizing a surprise party. Can you send a gift? I know you can't come since you're busy with your restaurant job." Restaurant job? As if I was still slinging hash at a diner somewhere. The casual dismissal stung, But it also clarified something for me. My family never sought information about my career, never asked details about the restaurant where I worked, never questioned when I briefly mentioned a positive review or a new position. The truth is, people only see what they expect to see, and they expected me to be just another line cook. So that's how they saw me. I replied that I'd send something special. And I did. A set of expensive crystal glasses that would make any celebration more elegant. On the card, I wrote simply, "Congratulations, Helena. With love, Clara." I chose those glasses carefully, knowing they'd photograph well for Helena's inevitable social media posts about her perfect life. Nobody thanked me for the gift, but a few weeks later I saw a photo on Facebook from my mother, Helena holding the glasses in a toast with the caption, "Using the beautiful gift from my sister who unfortunately couldn't be here." No name, no recognition, no status. In their imagination, I was just the daughter who couldn't succeed like her sister. Little did they know, I was about to become everything they thought I'd never be. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was buying gifts with money earned from a career they didn't think existed, celebrating achievements they'd never acknowledge. But hey, at least the champagne looked good in those glasses. And somewhere deep down, I knew that someday, the truth would come out. I just had to be patient. The biggest turnaround came when I opened my own restaurant, modern and sophisticated, which quickly became a reference point in the city. Still, I maintained my low profile. I didn't hide what I did, I just wasn't being noticed by the people who should have mattered most. Opening my own restaurant was the scariest thing I'd ever done. I found a small space in Greenwich Village that had been a failed bistro. The rent was astronomical. The kitchen needed complete renovation, and I was determined to make it work. My restaurant, Essence, opened its doors in an intimate space that could seat 42 people. I created a menu inspired by the 4 seasons, where each dish captured the essence of a specific moment of the year. Spring's lightness with fresh vegetables and aromatic herbs, summer's intensity with vibrant fruits, autumn's comfort with roots and spices, and winter's warmth with rich broths and slow techniques. It was my way of showing how life, like the seasons, goes through cycles of renewal. The weeks before opening were pure chaos. I was working 18-hour days, training staff, testing recipes, and trying to handle the million details that go into launching a restaurant. I had hired a small team of talented cooks who believed in my vision, including Sophia, a young sous chef who reminded me of myself when I first started. Watching her work with the same passion I felt gave me hope that I was building something meaningful. Opening night was terrifying. I stood in the kitchen watching the first customers walk through the door, wondering if anyone would actually come. But they did come, and they stayed, and they loved the food. By the end of the first month, we were booking reservations 2 weeks in advance. 3 months after opening, the New York Times published a full-page review, calling Essence Revelation of the Year, and me, the new star of New York gastronomy. I found out about the review from Sophia, who burst into the kitchen waving her phone and screaming. I read it 3 times before I believed it was real. Reservations went from walk-ins welcome to a 3-month waiting list overnight. I went from unknown to unmissable faster than you could say James Beard Award. The day the review came out, I called home to share the news. But first, I received a text from Chef Marcus. "So proud of you, Clara. You deserve every word of that review." Having my mentor's recognition meant everything. In a routine call home, I tried once more to share my achievement with my family. "Mom, I have news about work." "Honey, can I call you back? Helena is here showing photos of the new beach house they bought." "You won't believe the size of the porch." After that day, I stopped trying. Not out of anger or resentment, but because I finally understood. My success didn't need their validation to be real. I was like a tree falling in the forest. Just because they weren't there to hear it didn't mean it didn't make a sound. The restaurant industry noticed, though. Food and Wine magazine featured me in their Rising Stars issue. The James Beard Foundation invited me to cook at their annual gala. Celebrity chefs started following me on social media and requesting collaborations. My phone was ringing constantly with opportunities that my family would never know about because they never asked. I started keeping a mental scorecard. Every accolade, every review, every moment of recognition. Not for revenge, but for proof. Proof that I was worth something, even if the people who were supposed to see it first were blind. Each success felt like a small victory against everyone who had ever counted me out. What do you think happened next? Drop your predictions in the comments. I love seeing if you can guess where this is heading. Then one day, Helena sent me a message. She'd be in New York for a conference and decided to schedule dinner with me. With my usual calm, I suggested a restaurant. My restaurant. Helena accepted without even researching it. Because why would she? In her mind, I was probably suggesting some hole-in-the-wall place I could barely afford. Reading her message made my heart race. After all these years, Helena wanted to have dinner with me. Part of me wondered if she'd finally heard about my success. But another part suspected this was just another opportunity for her to remind me how much better her life was than mine. Either way, I knew this dinner would be significant. I spent days planning every detail. I arrived early and asked my staff to treat me like any other customer. I wanted to see Helena's natural reaction without interference. I sat at the reserved table and waited, feeling like a scientist about to observe a fascinating specimen in its natural habitat. The restaurant was buzzing that night. Every table was full, the energy was electric, and my team was performing flawlessly. I watched other diners enjoying dishes I had created and felt that familiar surge of pride. This was my kingdom, built from nothing but hard work and determination. Helena arrived 20 minutes late, dressed impeccably in a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Some things never change. Helena has been fashionably late since birth, as if the world exists on her personal timeline. She walked in with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything in her life. "Sorry for the delay," she said without really seeming sorry. "Traffic was terrible. This place is more upscale than I expected." She looked around, evaluating the environment with that look I knew so well. The look of someone mentally calculating how much each detail cost and wondering how her little sister could afford to eat here. She studied the menu with the intensity of someone taking a final exam. I watched her eyebrows raise at the prices, watched her try to process how I could possibly afford this place. The irony was delicious. My sister was sitting in my restaurant, questioning whether I belonged there. "So, how's life serving tables?" she asked casually while examining the menu, not even bothering to make eye contact. The audacity was breathtaking, really. Here we were, sitting in one of Manhattan's most sought-after restaurants, and she still saw me as the little sister who couldn't possibly amount to anything significant. "Actually, I haven't served tables in years," I replied calmly. "I'm a chef." "Oh, good for you," she said distractedly, still studying the prices with the fascination of someone discovering a new species. "These prices are pretty steep. Are you sure you can afford this place?" I almost laughed out loud. Almost. But I'd been waiting my whole life for this moment, and I wasn't about to ruin it with premature satisfaction. The setup was too perfect. Helena was about to get the surprise of her lifetime. "I think I can manage," I said, taking a sip of the wine I'd personally selected for our table, the same wine that had been featured in Wine Spectator magazine the month before. But Helena didn't need to know that. Yet. And it was exactly as I knew it would be. Upon arriving, my sister looked at the environment with a superior air, mocked the prices on the menu, and with a crooked smile, fired off, "This restaurant is too expensive for you, don't you think?" I just smiled and kept eating. I didn't want to prove anything. I just wanted to enjoy the moment. Because sometimes the best theater is the kind where only one person knows they're watching a performance. The evening unfolded like a masterpiece of dramatic irony. Every dish that arrived at our table was a creation of mine. Every flavor profile was something I had developed through countless hours of experimentation. Helena was literally eating my art, while simultaneously telling me I'd never amount to anything. The universe has a sense of humor, I'll give it that. During dinner, Helena talked about herself, business, friends, shoes. I listened to everything with the same patience of someone who had spent their entire life being ignored. It was like listening to a greatest hits album I'd heard 1,000 times before, all about Helena's accomplishments, Helena's success, Helena's perfect life. "You know, Clara, I've been thinking," she said between bites of my signature appetizer. "Mom said you're doing well, but honestly, you're already 35. Don't you think it's time to have a real career? I can recommend you for an administrative job at the bank. It doesn't pay much, but it's a start." The condescension was so thick you could cut it with one of my professional-grade knives. Each dish that arrived at our table was a work of art. The servers served with reverence, explaining each element with precision. Helena barely listened, focused on her monologue about her perfect life. It was like watching someone miss a sunset because they were too busy taking selfies. "This presentation is incredible," she commented while photographing her main course for Instagram. "Whoever designed this menu is brilliant. The flavors are so complex, so sophisticated. I've never experienced anything like this." Those words hit different when you know they're talking about your own creation. It was like being complimented by someone wearing a disguise. I smiled internally, feeling a small wave of satisfaction hearing those sincere words. The same hands she thought were only good for serving tables had created every single bite she was raving about. The same creativity she'd dismissed as impractical was the foundation of every dish she was photographing for her social media. "This chef must be a genius," she commented absent-mindedly after tasting the dessert. "I've never eaten anything like this. The technique is flawless. The flavor combinations are inspired. This person is a true artist." I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling too widely. The entire evening was surreal. Here was my sister, completely oblivious to the fact that she was sitting in my restaurant, eating my food, being served by my staff, while simultaneously telling me I needed to get my life together. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted, but the best part was still coming. The moment I'd been building toward for years was just minutes away. I could see the waiter approaching with the check, and I knew everything was about to change. For those who are still watching, have you ever been underestimated by someone close to you? Let me know in the comments. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. When Helena asked for the check, already assuming I couldn't pay, the waiter approached and quite naturally said, "Don't worry about it. The owner already took care of everything, as always." Helena frowned. "The owner? What owner?" The waiter smiled and pointed to me. "Chef Clara, owner of Essence." Her fork hit the floor. Literally. The sound echoed across our table while Helena stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Her face went through a series of emotions in seconds: confusion, disbelief, surprise, and finally, stunned comprehension. The moment stretched between us like a taut string about to snap. I watched my sister's world reorganize itself in real time. Every assumption she'd ever made about me, every dismissive comment, every time she'd treated me like the family failure, it all came crashing down in that instant. You own this place?" she asked when she finally recovered her voice, her tone mixing incredulity with something approaching respect. For the first time in my life, I saw Helena look at me like I was an actual person, instead of a piece of furniture that occasionally spoke. "Yes," I replied simply. "For almost 2 years now." Helena looked around the restaurant with new eyes, taking in the elegant decor, the attentive staff, the sophisticated clientele. She was seeing it all for the first time, not as a customer, but as someone discovering they'd been sitting in their sister's empire while treating her like a peasant. But I heard some people talking about how hard it is to get reservations here when I was walking in tonight. They say it has a months-long waiting list. The pieces were clicking together in her head like a slot machine hitting jackpot. When I called, they said they were completely booked, but then they called me back and said they'd found a cancellation. 3 months, actually, I confirmed. But family always gets priority. I said it with the same casual tone she'd used to dismiss my entire existence for 3 decades. The role reversal was delicious. Helena looked genuinely stunned, like someone had just told her that gravity worked backwards or that the sky was actually green. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" With a gentle smile, I replied, "I did, several times. I said I had opened my own restaurant. I mentioned reviews, interviews, but nobody asked for details." The truth landed between us like a brick through a window, shattering years of assumptions. It wasn't a secret. There just wasn't anyone who wanted to listen. For years, I'd been speaking and they'd been hearing background noise. Every phone call where I mentioned my work, every time I tried to share my achievements, every moment I attempted to connect, they'd all fallen on deaf ears because my family had already decided who I was and what I was capable of. I need to call Mom," Helena said, still in shock, fumbling for her phone with trembling hands. "Please, feel free," I replied. "But first, would you like me to show you the kitchen? The kitchen where the magic happened. The kingdom they never knew I ruled. You seem to really enjoy the food tonight. I'd love to show you where it all comes together." After that dinner, family dynamics began to change. Helena told my parents about the restaurant, and suddenly, everyone wanted to know more about my life. My father, especially, started calling me frequently, asking questions about how business was going. Funny how success makes people suddenly develop hearing problems. They can finally hear you. The shift was immediate and surreal. Within 24 hours of Helena's visit, my phone was buzzing with messages from family members I hadn't heard from in months. Cousins wanted to know if I could get them reservations. My aunt shared my restaurant's Instagram page with all her friends. My mother suddenly remembered every detail of our conversations and wanted to know why I hadn't been more specific about my achievements. In one of those calls, my father finally addressed the elephant in the room. His voice was different, softer, more careful than I'd ever heard it. "Clara, dear, we've been thinking, we'd like to visit your restaurant. Is it really as hard to get a reservation as Helena said?" His voice had a tone I'd never heard before when he spoke to me, respect mixed with a healthy dose of regret. "Normally, yes," I replied, "but I can arrange a table for you whenever you want to come. Because that's what owners do. They arrange things. They make impossible things possible. That would be wonderful," he said. And I could hear something in his voice that I'd never heard before when he talked to me. Pride. Real, genuine pride. It only took 35 years and a 3-month waiting list for him to discover it. A week later, I received an email from Food and Wine magazine informing me that I'd been selected as Chef of the Year. When the reporter called me for the interview, she asked about my journey, about the obstacles I'd overcome, about what success meant to me. "Your parents must be very proud," she commented casually, assuming what any normal person would assume about a family whose daughter had achieved this level of success. I hesitated before answering, considering how to phrase this diplomatically. "They're starting to get to know my work now." "What do you mean? You're one of New York's most celebrated chefs." The reporter sounded genuinely confused, as if she couldn't comprehend how anyone could miss such obvious achievement. I smiled to myself, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes the people closest to us are the last to see us clearly. It was like being famous everywhere except in your own hometown. Except the hometown was my family dinner table. The reporter was quiet for a moment, processing what I'd said. Then she responded, "That's actually a beautiful way to put it. Mind if I quote you on that?" "Go ahead," I said. "Sometimes truth makes the best headlines." That quote ended up being the pull quote for the entire article. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the last to see us clearly." Chef Clara Bennett. It felt good to have my words matter to someone, to have my perspective valued and shared with the world. The article came out a month later, featuring a full-page photo of me in my kitchen, surrounded by the dishes that had made me famous. My phone exploded with congratulations from colleagues, customers, and food industry professionals. But the call that surprised me most came from my mother. "We saw the article," she said quietly. "We had no idea. We're so sorry, Clara. We're so proud of you." A month later, my parents came to New York to dine at my restaurant for the first time. I prepared a special menu with dishes that told our family story, including a dessert inspired by the only homemade birthday cake my mother made for me when I was 8 years old. Because if you're going to tell a story through food, might as well make it personal. The day they arrived, I was nervous in a way I hadn't been since opening night. This wasn't just about impressing food critics or industry professionals. This was about showing my family who I really was, who I'd become despite their lack of support. I wanted them to understand not just what I'd achieved, but how I'd achieved it. They arrived punctually, visibly nervous and out of place in the sophisticated environment. Helena and her husband came too, more comfortable but still clearly processing the shift in family dynamics. Watching my parents navigate my world was like watching tourists in a foreign country where they didn't speak the language. My mother wore her best dress, the one she saved for special occasions. My father had put on a tie, something he rarely did outside of work. They looked around with wide eyes, taking in the elegant decor, the professional staff, the unmistakable aura of success that permeated every corner of my restaurant. "This place is impressive," my father said, looking around with an expression that mixed surprise with a hint of regret. You could practically see him recalculating 30 years of assumptions about his younger daughter. I showed them the kitchen, the awards, the framed reviews. My mother touched my arm several times, as if she needed to confirm that I was real, that this success was real. It was like she was meeting me for the first time, seeing me as an actual person, rather than the disappointing daughter who never lived up to her potential. "Why didn't you ever insist on telling us?" she asked during dinner, looking genuinely confused, as if the problem had been my communication skills rather than their listening skills. "I did tell you," I replied simply. "In the few times you called, I mentioned I was working at a restaurant. You just assumed I was serving tables." The truth was gentle but unmistakable. Understanding crossed their faces slowly. It wasn't a moment of instant transformation, but the beginning of a process. I watched my father swallow hard, uncomfortable with the truth that was revealing itself like a photograph developing in slow motion. "Clara, how did you achieve all this?" he asked finally, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. And then I told them. I told them about the sleepless nights studying after double shifts, about Chef Marcus who took me under his wing when no one else would, about saving every penny to invest in my dream, about the critics who didn't know my family history but recognized my talent. I told it without drama, without victimization, just facts. Because the facts were dramatic enough on their own. "You must hate us," my mother whispered at one point, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "No," I replied honestly. "I learned a lot from you. I learned that nobody will fight for me if I don't fight first. I learned that my worth doesn't depend on anyone's validation, and I meant it. Their neglect had been the best teacher I never wanted." During dessert, I noticed my father had barely touched his food. His eyes were watery, something I'd never seen before. "I think we owe you an apology, Clara," he said finally, his voice choked. "We always assumed that." "It's okay," I interrupted gently. "What matters is that we're here now. Because holding grudges is like carrying rocks in your backpack. It only weighs you down." Helena smiled at me with a mix of admiration and newfound understanding. Your restaurant is incredible, Clara. And you're incredible for achieving all this. I didn't do it alone, I replied, raising my glass. I had excellent mentors along the way who believed in me when I needed it most. I thought of Chef Marcus, who had called the night before to congratulate me on the food and wine article. In the following months, our relationship began to change gradually. It wasn't a magical transformation. Years of patterns don't change overnight. But there was new respect, a new willingness to listen, to see who I really was. Progress, not perfection. During a later visit, my 8-year-old niece came to visit me in the restaurant kitchen and asked, "Aunt Clara, how do you know how to make such delicious food?" I looked at Helena, who smiled at me with a new look of admiration, and replied to the little one, "You know when you draw something and feel really proud? Food is my drawing. I practice every day, even when it's difficult, and each day it gets better and better." And I realized I had achieved something much more valuable than recognition or revenge. I had managed to grow without becoming bitter, to build without destroying, and finally, I had begun to earn something money can't buy, a family that was learning to see me. So, my beautiful viewers, that's the end of my story. Remember that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply becoming everything they said you couldn't be. Life has a funny way of serving justice at exactly the right temperature. What's your story of resilience? Share it below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories every Tuesday and Thursday. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next week. If this story resonated with you, make sure to hit that like button and tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have been your biggest supporter? Your stories fuel these videos, and I love reading every single one.